Amen. Hey, it is good to see everybody today. That those of you that braved the snow and you came out, I don't know if you saw, but we have. This is who loves the snow. Does anybody love the snow? Who does not love the snow? Yeah. So just so that you know, I love the snow. So we have those. What are they called? Berms. Outside we have those berms, and it was fun to have so much snow that you have to like cut ways through the berms so that people can walk to make it easy and good for y'all. You know, I'm so glad that y'all are here and also watching online. So today, just so you know, it's going to be a little bit different than what we normally do, just because of the topic and things. So we're in this teaching series called Emote Control, and it would be good if we had a remote for emotions when things got crazy that you could turn it off. Does anybody wish you had that? Come on, wives. Right? Husbands, you best not say nothing. But really, I'm so glad that you're here. If you're a new here, first time guest, whatever, you can fill out that new here card and then take that back to the back in the VIP room, and we will give you a free gift. If you're watching online, there's the link right above that you can fill out. But you can get out your phone if you have one, and you can check into the Rock Church, and then we will provide meals for Open Doors and money and things to Open Doors, which is a emergency family homeless shelter. For us, we're just a place where you can be real with God and your community. And so I don't know exactly what you came in with today, but today we're going to talk about something today that is about depression and anxiety. And who gets freaked out whenever you start talking about that? Anybody? I don't know if you've ever been in a church service where we talk about these things, but just so you know, this is going to be very sensitive. And what I want and my hope today is that we can read Scripture and we can see some hope, and we can see that even the strongest man that ever existed, he cried. And so I joke around. I like to joke around. I was talking to a lady. She's kind of like a mom figure to me. And those of you who were with us last, I think it was December or something, could have been January, but she came up and spent time with us. Her name was Vicky, and she's a counselor. She gets to speak into my life a lot. And I don't know if that freaks you out, knowing that the pastor of the Rock Church at times talks with her and also other counselors. But for me, I've dealt with a lot of things, and I think all of us have dealt with some things that we wish we wouldn't have had to, right? And what I don't want for today, the goal for today isn't to rip open any past things. That's not the goal. The goal is not to have you walk out and have feelings to where you wish would have never came up. So I just want to be really clear and let that be the case. But when it comes to this depression and anxiety, I've got a lot of stuff that I'm just going to read. It's quotes and different things. And so when it comes to anxiety and depression, it seems like everybody talks about that except the church. And then at times, whenever you and we go through something, or maybe you've went through a lot of severe things, and you have triggers. If I say triggers, does that make sense? Something that just makes you remember a lot of things, and sometimes you have triggers, and what could easily be said is that, well, you're just really messed up. And when it comes to the church realm, it's been said that, you know, all you need is Jesus, and if you still struggle, it's because of some sort of sin that is in your life. And I want to let you know, when it comes to the Bible and the Jewish culture, the time that Jesus walked and talked on the earth, people, whenever they looked at other people and whenever they would struggle, they would say, oh, it's because they're involved in some deep, dark sin. They're struggling because they're not living right. Who thinks that's crazy? Like, I do, just so you know. But just know that we kind of do the same thing today, except we put a thing on it called karma, right? Yeah. Well, just because I want to really be clear, and sometimes just because you struggle, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your faith. I know some really dear people to my heart that struggle, that have spent time behind closed doors in padded rooms, that really love Jesus, but that just struggle. And for us, I don't know if this brings tension to you or not, but for me, this is something that's very dear to my heart. And depression and anxiety can take us to dark places and make us think that there's no way out. And while when it comes to whenever bad things happen because of maybe we say if people struggle, it's because of some sort of sin in their life. While it may be true, and sometimes we have to reap what we sow. Does that make sense? Sometimes we have to do that. Scripture talks about that. In Galatians, it talks about that, reaping what we sow. But please hear me, that depression and anxiety doesn't necessarily have to be involved in that. And so there's layers and struggles and life situations that cause unexplainable times, that sometimes we struggle with isolation. Sometimes we struggle with anger, with deep sadness, or if kind of like me, sometimes there's been times in your life where you've just been numb. Have you ever been there? Like, you're just taking the blows. All this happened. Okay. My car broke down. Okay. This, whatever it is, blank, happened, and you're just living life. You're numb. You're taking the blows. And sometimes you just keep going, and the blows comes, and it's easy to go on and not to deal with some of the things that we've deal with. And sometimes anxiety and depression can cause major tears, where sobbing where you can't stop. And with me, just so you know, I've been there. I've been at places at times in my life where I thought, you know, I'm never going to smile again. I remember I was in Burger King, and that's probably why I thought I would never smile again. People tell me, they say, Zach, whenever you're about to cry, you just make a joke, so whatever. But really, I remember being in Burger King. It was about 4 days after my mom died, whenever I was 13, and I was watching people. I like to watch people, one, because some people are funny. Like, God's got a sense of humor looking at some people, right? Did he just say that? Yeah. It's funny, wasn't it, Jacob? Yeah. But I remember watching them laugh and things, and I thought, you know what, I'm never going to be there again. And not only that, because of some actions of mine, my wife and I have gone through deep, dark things where we looked at each other in the face and talked about divorce, where we thought, we're going to stick it out, and then 4 or 5 months down the road thinking, is this even worth it anymore? And I don't know if me saying that gives you comfort to let you know, like, you're not alone, or not, or if it freaks you out. But if you say it freaks you out, just so you know, have you read the Bible? There's a guy named David. His son tried to kill him, like, pretty crazy. There was one point in David's life that David acted like a madman, where he's drooling and everything and acting crazy. That was David, and he acted insane. And then there's a guy by the name of Jeremiah. Has anybody ever heard of Jeremiah? Jeremiah, he is known as the weeping prophet, the one who cries, the one whose heart was broken. And then he even wrote a book that is part of Scripture that is called Lamentations. And I think this is kind of crazy, but sometimes we think if we cry or if we deal with a lot of anxiety or depression, whether it's clinical or not, sometimes we think if we cry that we're weak. But know this, that Lamentations, it means loud cries. And so I don't know exactly what you came in today thinking, but I'm just going to read a couple things from a guy that is very, very popular, not popular as like a movie star or something, but very profound in the early 1900s. His name was Charles Spurgeon. Has anybody ever heard of Charles Spurgeon? Charles Spurgeon, he is known as the Prince of Preachers. I read a lot of guys who wrote things that are dead. I think an advantage in that is that if I do that, they're not going to mess up any more than they already did, right? You see a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of pastors and things now that fall to sexual sin or something because of things. But Charles Spurgeon, I'm just going to read this, okay? It says that he's known as the Prince of Preachers. Despite the many blessings and victories Spurgeon experienced, he also suffered much throughout his life and ministry. One of the sufferings he experienced was causeless depression. He once said in a sermon, "My spirits were shrunken so low that I would weep by the hour like a child, yet I did not know what I wept for." This is a guy that's known as the Prince of Preachers. It says, causeless depression plagued even the Prince of Preachers, and he often felt ashamed that he was vulnerable because of his tears. Tears and anxiety and depression, it attacks us. And know this, that Jesus is the great healer. Jesus is the great healer. I believe that. I believe that because I've experienced that. And I don't know what you think, but if you knew some of the things I share some things, but then there's some things that I don't even want to put you through with heartache and things. But I know that Jesus is the great healer. But know this, my dear friend said, counselor who deals with childhood trauma. She said something that has always stuck with me about Jesus being the great healer, but we still, on this side of heaven, have some sort of effects of sin. And sometimes we still struggle with things, and struggling doesn't necessarily mean it's you struggling through it. It's maybe something happened to you, and you're working through that. And she said, when it comes to some clinical stuff, we could take medicine, and I want to let you know, I think medicine is good. I think God gave us some medicine. I mean, in church, people get really tense when you talk about medicine. I don't know if that's you or not, but just so you know, this may freak you out, but Luke was a physician. Right. He was a doctor. And so when it comes to what Vicki said was, we can have some things to help us, but it has to be combined with spiritual healing as well. Amen. We could focus on one and forget the other, but know that right now there's things that you wish would never come up again, I'm sure. Just like I do. Going back to Charles Spurgeon, this is from his diary, his journal. I guess that would be a more proper thing for guys. Journal, right? It's a diary. But he said this whenever he was going through a lot of this. He said, "This loneliness, which, if I mistake not, is felt by many of my brethren, is a fertile source of depression." Then he said, "I've become very ill for more than 5 weeks, that during that time I've been brought into deep waters of mental depression." He couldn't say that publicly then because he would be locked up. People would think he's crazy. So he journaled about it. And then he said this, "To my great sorrow, last Sunday night I was unable to preach. I had prepared a sermon upon this text, which much hope of it is usefulness, for which I intended to be a supplement to my morning sermon, which was a doctrinal exposition. The evening sermon was intended to be practical and committed the whole subject and attention to living this out. I came here feeling quite fit to preach. When an overpowering nervousness oppressed me, I lost all sense of control and I left the pulpit." He couldn't preach. So overwhelmed. And I don't know exactly what you came in here thinking or things, but we're going to run through. I know that took a little bit. I just wanted to let you see that people in the Bible have struggled, and there's even a whole book called Lamentations about that, and then how other preachers that we look to, like Charles Spurgeon, struggled in that, how I've struggled in that. I used to think that if I vocalized some of the things that I've struggled with, I used to think that people would hate me and people wouldn't trust me. But I think that's what the enemy does. I think there's something whenever we vocalize things that is a healing process. Sometimes it's not a cure-all. But we're going to look at this passage in John 11, chapter 1 through, we'll go all the way to 44, but don't freak out like you right then. You were like, 44 verses. I'm depressed. No, I'm just going to story this. If you have a church background, more than likely you've heard this before. Watch online, more than likely you've heard this before. But John 11, chapter 11, verse 1 through 6, I'm going to read this. It says, this is getting towards the end of Jesus' ministry. And it says, now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. And it was her brother Lazarus who was what? Sick. So the sister sent a message to him, Lord, the one you love is sick. Surely if you can get Jesus' attention, you would say, the one you love. And so that's what they did. The one you love is sick. Then listen, when Jesus heard it, he said, this sickness will not, what? End in death. But it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Hang on. Y'all see that? Like, he stayed. They sent word to Jesus, hey, the one you love is sick. They didn't say, our brother, all this stuff. Like, the one you love is sick. Like, we need you. They sent word to him because they knew that he was the source that could heal in some way. And so on your insert, there's a blank I want you to fill out right here. But reaching out to God is paramount. It's so important. That's important for us when it comes with anxiety and depression and all kinds of emotions. That's what we need to do. That's what they did here. They reached out to the God-man. They reached out to Jesus. And so what's really crazy is that Jesus said the sickness isn't going to end in death, but it's for the glory of God. It's so that God would be known. And there's different people on all kinds of different things, but to me, this is Zach speaking. I think that sometimes God allows me to go through things so that I can help other people. I don't know exactly how all that works, but there's been several times when, like for example, when my wife and we had a miscarriage. And we had this miscarriage, and then praying through that, crying through that. And then it wasn't long that somebody else had a miscarriage, and we got to be with them. And that, I don't know how all that works, but I don't know if we're more attentive when things happen to us, so we notice other things around or not. But I saw that, and I want you to go on, look at verse 21. So the story goes on. There's other things that happen in the story. It goes back and forth. Then in verse 21, this is whenever Jesus was coming to where they were. Then Martha said to Jesus in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And I think if we're completely honest, that maybe we've said something like the same thing. God, if you had been here, this person wouldn't have done this or that. Or for me, God, if you would have been here, if you are a God who is real and cares for me specifically, my mom at 13 wouldn't have taken a 12 gauge and committed suicide? God, if you had been here, the sexual abuse wouldn't have happened, right? And I don't know about you, but maybe you can relate to Martha. And right now, I don't know if you've ever felt like you can't go on anymore when it comes to suicide. Suicide's very high in our country, and it's devastating. Some people say all kinds of different things when it comes to suicide, whether it's selfish, whether people are just mentally ill, and I don't really like that terminology, whether it's they're demon possessed or whatever. People have all kinds of different thoughts when it comes to suicide, but I think there comes a point to where we think that we can't go on anymore. Have you ever been there? I can't go on anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm just going through the same stuff over and over and over. I'm looking up, this came to mind. But have you ever heard that God will not give you more than you can handle? Have you ever heard that? Know this, 2 Corinthians chapter, I know this, they don't have this, and that's fine. This just came to mind. But 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, you may write that down. But it says this: we do not want you to be uninformed about the troubles we experience. We are under great pressure, far beyond our ability to handle it, to endure it, so that we have despaired the life itself, but this happens so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. I think with you and I, we think at times we can't go forward, we can't go on. I'm just in this cycle. You know, no one cares what he does is gets us in isolation. Makes us think no one cares. Makes us think that even God Himself doesn't care whenever we ignore the rhythm that God gives our heart. And it's easy to think that, but you and I, we can only see really the here and now. Who likes to look at the big picture? Does anybody? Some of us, we like the big picture. Some of us, it's hard to see. Some of us, there's so much mess, we can't even see the big picture. But know this in-between time, Jesus waited. Don't forget that. Jesus waited. And He said, this is going to be for the glory of God, so that people will know more of who God is. This will all be about God. Just wait. And Jesus waited. And you and I, a lot of times, we live in the in-between time. We're in the Lazarus life. We don't know. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. We don't know what's going to go on down the road. But I do want to let you know this. Sometimes, I don't know if this will give you comfort or not, but maybe people say, well, things happen for a reason, and later on you'll know why. You may not. You may not know why. Are you okay with that? You may not know why. And why things happen. Like why did I have to go through sexual abuse, physical abuse, and all that? Why did that happen? Why did all these things happen? Why? But know that situations, and this is on here, and we can see this, but situations bring major doubts. They do. I don't know how it's going to go. I can't see that person ever again. Situations bring major doubts. But then going on, as the story goes on, as Martha, don't forget, said, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. If you'd been here, we say, this wouldn't have happened. In John 11, verse 25 and 26, it says, Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and the what? And the life. That was kind of terrible. Can we do it again? Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and the what? Life. Woo! All right, that's good. Hey, y'all going to have to help me preach now. Here it goes. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and what? Believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? That's what he says. Do you believe this? And for us, do we believe that? And know that, I want you to know this because of past things in my life, what constantly comes up. And like my mind is crazy. Whew. Y'all know this. You're like, I'll sit here and I don't know. Yeah. And my mind is crazy. But sometimes here's what happens is I think, you know what? I can be doing everything that I can, but I think, you know what? God doesn't love me because of how I feel. But know this, Jesus brings life and Jesus brings salvation. Anyone who believes on the Lord Jesus Christ will be saved. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. We know that, Romans 10:9. Like we don't go away from that. We hold to that and we put a stake in the ground and we say that's it. But then what happens because of abuse or things, if you've had that in your life, you think, well, I'm not good enough and all this. And while we are broken and sinful, listen, once we become part of the family of God and once we put our faith in Jesus, then what we read in John 10 is that the Father has us in His hand. Amen. And no one can take us out. Isn't that good? Right. Has nothing to do with how you feel. Aren't you glad? Yeah. Your salvation has nothing to do with how you feel, because sometimes, hey, y'all don't want to see me. Right? I mean, maybe, I don't know. Sometimes, whenever we work in the church and serve the Lord all together, sometimes we get aggravated at each other. That's right. But guess what? It's called a family, and that's what families do. Right. You got to learn to live with people now, because if not, you're going to live with us in heaven, and I hope we get stuck next to each other. That'll preach right there. I don't know. I'm telling you, that will preach. But it says, anyone who believes in me will never die. And when it comes to your emotions, don't let your emotions think that God has left you or forsaken you. You know that Jesus came and He lived His life. He died this death that was terrible. He yelled out to Tetelestai, it is finished. And when He says it is finished, that means we don't have to do it. So it's not about us. It's about God. It's not how we feel. But then going on, we see that Jesus comes on the picture. Then in verse 32, I'll read to verse 34. It says, as soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw Him, she fell at His feet and told Him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Like, hang on, y'all said that already. Are you beating a dead horse? Let's go on. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying, He was deeply moved in His spirit and troubled. Where have you put Him? He asked. Lord, they told Him, come and see. And so Jesus saw them. And there's all kinds of different thinkings on what happened here when Jesus saw them crying. Some people say Jesus saw them crying, and so He was angry because they were acting like they had no hope. Some people say He was sympathetic, but what I want you to see is here, they saw her crying, and this word crying here is more like wailing. Have you ever seen that? Like deep, like you can't stop, like you can't breathe. You know what that's like? And so there that's what happened. Jesus saw this and he was deeply moved in his spirit. Then in verse 35, the very first verse that I ever memorized, Jesus wept. And this wasn't a wailing. This was deep sadness. Just like you're looking and tears are just falling. Know this, we have a God who can sympathize with us. Amen. I don't know how it works. I don't know all that, but I know right here Jesus wept, and he was weeping, I think, because of sin, because of death and things that had to happen, because death comes because of sin. The wages of sin is death. And so right now, I don't know exactly what's going on in your life, but I think here and watching online, I think God brought you here because you needed this. And I think some of us may be fighting back tears right now. But know this, that Jesus wept. It's okay. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to not know what's going on. But know this, fill in this blank on your insert. Faith brings hope beyond what we can see. Isn't that good? Faith brings hope beyond what we can see. It doesn't matter what happens. We have faith, and it may seem crazy, but we're going to trust anyway. Know that is faith. Faith is taking the step, not knowing what's going to happen. Faith is trusting without seeing. Faith is driving in the snow, not knowing if you're going in a ditch. Right? So verse 36, look at this. We're going to fly through this. Ready? 5-point harness. Here we go. So the Jews said, see how he loved him, but some of them said, couldn't he who opened the blind man's eye also kept this man from dying? And that's what we say. Like, if Jesus really did all this, couldn't he have prevented some of these things that happened to me? Couldn't he help me in this? If Jesus was real, couldn't he do this? Look, verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone was lying against it. Remove the stone, Jesus said. I love how the Bible gets real. Watch this. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, Lord, there's already a stench. I think that's funny. Sorry. There's already a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Remember, Jesus waited. That's right. He waited, and for us, it's like, God, if you were real, wouldn't you have stopped this? If you were real, wouldn't you have stopped it? But check this out. Do you think God knew what he was doing? Yeah. Do you think God, I don't know how it all works. I don't know. Charles Spurgeon said that he thinks that some of his depression he was going through had to be so that people would know Jesus. I don't know how it all works. That's what he said. But going on, he's been dead for 4 days. Verse 40, Jesus said to her, did not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes to the Father, raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I know that you always hear me. But because of the crowd standing here, I say this so that they may believe you sent me. After he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out bound hand and foot with linen strips, kind of like a mummy, right? And his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unwrap him and let him go." This is a actual life account, and people say whenever it's Jesus rose from the dead, well, no, this other people rose from the dead too. Other people rose from the dead in the earlier books with Elijah and things, but Jesus got Lazarus out of the tomb. So fill this in, this last thing here. Jesus is just what we need. Jesus is just what we need. But know this, just because you have Jesus doesn't mean your life's going to be not stressful. Just because you have Jesus doesn't mean that you're not going to be depressed. Just because you have Jesus doesn't mean you're not going to worry. I don't know if I said that right. Worry. Thank you all. Southern interpretation. Hard. But Jesus is just what we need. I believe that Jesus really rose this guy named Lazarus from the dead. And I really believe this, that whatever you're struggling with, and maybe, just maybe, some of you may be like me, and there's parts of your life that you can't even remember because something so terrible happened. And maybe God's protecting you from seeing that, but maybe God wants you to remember some of those things. But whatever it is, know this, is that God cares for you specifically and personally. We serve a God that didn't put the world in motion and step away and never be involved ever again. We serve a God who is here and active. And what I know is when I'm crying and when I'm hurt, when I feel lonely, I can know this, that Jesus is enough. Are you with me? Yeah. Like this God, I can't do enough. I can't go anymore. God, I don't know what's going on. I get concerned. You know, whenever we became our own local church, there's stressors that came with that, and I think, all right, God, how's this going to work? I don't know how this is going to work. I'm trying to do all this kind of paperwork to make all this happen. Then I clean the church. Then I do the yard. Then do all this stuff. And it's like, God, I don't know how I can do this. Then we need more funds, so got a support raise and all that because that's everything's not free for a church. Then it's like, oh man, how's this going to happen? And then going through stuff. But you know, God reminds me that some of you, your lives have been changed because of this place. Amen. And I'm reminded when God let me know, not in an audible voice, but let me know, hey, it's my church. I got this. And no matter what concerns I may have, know that Jesus is just what I need. And I think if Satan can get us isolated, he's winning. If Satan can make us think the worst in other people, he's winning. But sometimes we don't even want to deal with what's happened. And maybe, just maybe, like for some of us, we really need to put our faith in Jesus and not play a game. So here's the main point, last thing to write down. Jesus can make the impossible possible. I don't know what you've been through, but I do know Jesus is what you need. Jesus can make the impossible possible. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Listen, hey, there's a time when this guy named Peter walked on water. Does anybody know that? Hey, a lot of people make fun of Peter, but look, at least he had the faith to get out of the boat. A lot of us still be sitting there. He got out of the boat, and then he started sinking. But here's something, don't forget this. There's a story, you may need to read it, but Jesus reached out his hand. Jesus didn't walk toward him. He reached out his hand. And for us, we need to know, maybe God's got us out there in the ocean, and we're trying to follow, and we're sinking. Look, focus on Jesus. Don't worry about anything else. Sometimes we get so paralyzed that we can't go on, but we can. There's this thing where I think that sometimes we're hurt by people, but sometimes the only way we can heal is through other people. God uses other people to help us heal, and that may be hard for some of us, but what is your action step? What are you going to do with taking away? Maybe this was an eye-opener for you to let you know that Jesus cried, and that it's okay to cry, and that it's okay to struggle. Do you know it's okay? It's okay not to be okay. But maybe for you, your action step is to say yes to the Lord, yes to Jesus. Hey, say, yes, everything I have is yours, not just Sunday morning. Sunday morning's a big deal, but don't just think Sunday morning's it. All in. If you want to explore more of what that's like, you can fill out the Connect card. Let us know. Mark Spiritual Things. If you're watching online, you can fill out the connection card that's digital online there. But maybe your next, maybe your step is, maybe it's time to maybe talk with somebody. Maybe other followers of Jesus. Maybe a counselor. Maybe somebody. But know this, I'm not a professional in that area, and I don't even try. I'm going to go see Sean. But really, like for us, we need to say, sometimes be open and honest and say, you know what, I need to vocalize some things because I need to heal. Who likes to barely get in the pool? Or does anybody like to jump in all the way? Yeah, sometimes we need to jump in and say, you know, this is it. I'm going to trust the Lord and say yes to Jesus. So, just so you know, all through this week, we're gonna post stuff on our social media page at the Rock Church, and to show different things from Charles Spurgeon and different insights on what Jesus does with our tears and all kinds of things. So be sure to follow that this week, okay? I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing some more. So let's bow our heads together.